Welcome to Rome Reports Premium. I'm Kelsey Gussie. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Over the last few weeks, we've been hearing lots of information about the late Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, about his writing, about his papacy, and you probably think we've heard it all. Because here at Rome Reports, we brought you 4 to 5 pieces of news each day. But the question is, have you actually heard it all? Because here in the studio today, we have Seàn-Patrick Lovett, who worked at Vatican Radio as the head of the English department for all 8 years of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI's pontificate. Thank you, Sean, for being here today.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you for joining us, whoever you are and wherever you are. It's great that you could join us. And evidently, you're curious about Pope Benedict XVI. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this Rome Reports Premium. So I hope in the next few minutes to give you some insights that you wouldn't have read about necessarily in the press and elsewhere. But I'm in Kelsey Gussie's hands, and I'm just here doing as I'm told. So go ahead.
Well, I mean,
I
think the first thing is the fact that I know you worked in the Vatican or with the Vatican since the 1970s with Pope Paul VI.
Yeah, that's the gray hair.
You can't tell.
I started working under Pope Paul VI, which means all the way through to Francis. So 5 popes. Most people, if I ask them who those popes were, forget John Paul I, which makes me very sad because he was extraordinary and he was sort of the gateway to John Paul II. So Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis.
So you got to know Pope Benedict XVI before he was Benedict XVI, when he was just Cardinal Ratzinger.
When he was just Cardinal Ratzinger,
Yes.
He was never just Cardinal Ratzinger. He was always a very prominent figure in the Vatican, and you would sort of bump into him, in going about your business in the Vatican. He was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, but just very active. If you met him crossing St. Peter's Square, he would always stop and greet you, and you could have a few words with him. I interviewed him as Cardinal Ratzinger when he published one of his many books. And one of my prized possessions at home is my very own signed autographed copy, Dear Seàn-Patrick, from Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, in his tiny, weeny little scrawling, almost illegible handwriting. And I say that because on that occasion, I really got a sense of who the man was. He was not the Pope. He was an eminent cardinal, but who the man was. It was shortly before the death of Pope John Paul II. He was very ill. And here was I speaking to one of his closest confidants. So we finished the interview. We have a cup of tea because he had tea at around 5 o'clock, and we're just sitting in his sitting room chatting. The interview's over. We've talked about the book. It's done. But we're journalists, and so we never stop asking questions. and there's always a follow-up question. And so here we are sipping the tea, and the question sort of that springs to mind is, well, Your Eminence, we know the Holy Father is not doing very well. How is he, by the way? And he says, oh, well, etc. He gives us some insight. And we say, but when he is no more, what are your plans? And here Joseph Ratzinger gets this faraway look in his eye. He kind of looks at it in a corner of the room, and he smiles and he goes, I will return to my students in the mountains at my university.
In Bavaria, I'm
assuming. In Bavaria. Yeah. And that was his heart speaking. His university, his academic life, his students, that's where he wanted to be. Yeah. And it was just a few weeks, and all of a sudden there he was up on the main loggia of St. Peter's Basilica as Benedict XVI.
I mean, it must have been a huge change. Obviously, it was unexpected for him as well. So
was it? People often say, did you expect? Was it unexpected? Well, it wasn't unexpected.
For him or for?
He may have wished to go back to Bavaria, but I think he must have known. We covered the funeral of John Paul II. He gave this extraordinary homily. He spoke to the cardinals gathered in Rome for the conclave. I think they remember that John Paul II, it was 26 years of pontificate. And so the sense was he was the man who would guarantee the continuity. He was the legacy of John. He'd been so close to him. He understood him and felt he knew where to take the papacy after that. So I think but most of us from the inside weren't that surprised when he stepped up onto that balcony.
Well, with that, let's look back at that moment in 2005 when he was elected.
We're a television station.
We are. Might as well use it.
We have the pictures, right? Okay,
let's take a look back.
Let's see it. Yeah. Questa è l'elezione, dobbiamo vedere, quella è la visita negli Stati Uniti. Sì. Dobbiamo vedere l'elezione che è la prima. Sì.
Wow.
Oh,
well, we're getting this all sorted.
We're jumping ahead, yes.
Yeah, we're thinking about the future.
We're talking, this is our line producer over here. You don't see him, but he's playing a very important part.
Very essential to this.
And without him, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So thank you, Arturo.
Here's the special
These are the pictures. You've seen them before, and you probably saw them several times over since the last week, but I personally never get tired of watching them.
I would say for some people watching, I know for myself, this was the first papal conclave. This is the first papal election that I remember. I mean, I was alive for it.
Dare I ask how old you were?
When he was elected, I was 7 or 8.
Gosh.
Yes, so I barely remember, but I do remember bits and pieces. So,
well, it was on the second day. Grazie per questa immagine. It was those of us who were a bit older and do remember. It was, I think it was about 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon, if I remember correctly. And it was on the second day of voting, and on the fourth ballot. They'd had 2 the previous day, 2 that day. And that was the proof that it wasn't a huge surprise. It wasn't a massive effort for them to get the majority and to decide that it was him. But if you ask me what I was surprised at,
yes, were you?
Were those first words on the balcony? I wonder if you remember them, where he introduces himself.
Yes.
As
a humble servant, a humble hard worker, I think were the words.
In the vineyard
of the Lord.
And that echoes down, down. It's so beautiful. A humble servant, humble worker in the vineyard of the Lord, so. And
I mean, like I was saying, I was at home in Florida, but where were you specifically, since you had been working in the Vatican? Where were you when he was elected in 2005?
Well, we'd covered, of course, as I said, the funeral for John Paul II, which was massive. I mean, 2 million people came to Rome for that funeral. And we'd done all I did the radio and television commentaries for that. But of course, you don't know when the election is going to happen. We really thought it would be quick. It was even quicker, I think, than we imagined.
Really?
And so we had a live broadcast scheduled for 6 o'clock in the afternoon. It happened at 4:45. I was watching, we had a live feed from St. Peter's Square. And of course, from my office in the Vatican, we could hear the bells. The bells were an innovation brought in by John Paul II. Do you know that? Yes.
Okay.
Because when John Paul I was elected, we'll get back to Benedict in a second, but when John Paul I was elected, the cardinals in conclave were so excited that they burned the white and black candles together, and the smoke was gray.
Confusing.
And for a long time, no one knew whether we had a pope or we didn't.
Yeah.
And so it was agreed that when a pope would be elected, you get the white smoke and the bells would ring. So that's how.
Just to clarify.
We made quite sure. So that's how we knew.
Which I saw also. Obviously, it's St. Peter's bells that first start ringing, but then throughout Rome, usually other bells join in.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's a very beautiful thing. And then my next encounter with him, personal encounter, one-on-one encounter, was shortly after a year after his election, and it was his visit to the Vatican Radio.
Oh, yeah.
Vatican Radio is also nicknamed the Pope's Radio. It was founded in 1931, so we used to call it the grandmother of radio stations, and it was a great honor for the Pope to come and visit. And can I tell you the story? Because
I would love to hear it.
It's a great story. So the Pope is visiting your radio station. What is the one thing that you want? He comes to visit Rome Reports. What do we want?
I want a photo.
Well, you want a photo, and you want to sit down with him
and have a conversation.
Of course you do. Of course you do. So the director of the Vatican Radio and the director of the press office at the time, this is 2006, with the same person, our good friend, Father Federico Lombardi, the Jesuit. So we talk to Father Federico and we say, listen, Pope is coming to visit us. He's going to be here. We have to have him in studio, at least have him on the air to greet the listeners. It's his radio station. We contact the people organizing the visit, and it's not a lot of time. Pope doesn't give interviews. This is not Pope Francis. Pope doesn't give interviews on air, not sure, etc. Clearly, they didn't ask him. Because when he got there, we brought him into a studio which is dedicated to his predecessor, John Paul II. It's the studio where Cardinal Wojtyła came to broadcast messages in Polish back to Poland, because the Polish communist authorities wouldn't let him broadcast there. So there's a little plaque there. And we got the Holy Father to come in, and we said, would you bless the plaque to your predecessor? Well, of course. Once he's in the studio, the red light goes on, and Father Lombardi says, would you like to sit down, Santità? And he goes, sure. Benedict sits down in the chair, the journalists are there, the microphone's alive, and he does his first ever live interview. It's one of 3 occasions in his entire pontificate, 8 years, that he spoke off the cuff without notes.
Did he do it in English, Italian?
He did it in Italian.
Wow.
You want to know what he said?
I would love to. The off the cuff part or all of it?
Off the cuff. He didn't know he was going to do it. And he gives one of the most beautiful reflections on communications and radio I've ever heard. He says, all communication, and radio in particular, does not speak to the head. It speaks to the heart. And you go, this is an 80-something-year-old man. How does he know that? And this is the Pope. This is the intellectual Pope. This is the philosopher. This is the theologian. He's talking about not speaking to the head, but speaking to the heart. And then he says, in Italian, it's all about reciprocità, reciprocity. So I speak, you listen, you speak, and I listen. And that way, he says, we come to understanding and we start working together for peace. Now, how beautiful is that?
It is, it's beautiful.
Unprepared, impromptu, and truly, and those are those, I've never forgotten those things. When you communicate not to the head, but to the heart. And it's always about listening and speaking, speaking and listening, reciprocity.
And I mean, I think that's really important, especially today, now that everyone can, communicate through social media, through their own computer, through anything. I mean, that's important to know that when you're sending out a message, you're not necessarily speaking to people's heads, you're trying to reach them here.
Very much.
And so that's super important, I think.
And that before we speak, we listen.
Exactly.
Because there's so much yelling and screaming going on.
So much noise.
Such a hurry to speak. Yes. We don't stop to pay attention to what the other person is saying.
Exactly. And with that, I want to talk about the fact that since you did work at Vatican Radio with or under Pope Benedict XVI for all 8 years of his pontificate, it might be a little difficult to put all of that into a couple minutes.
Don't say. I know what you're asking. Don't ask me what my favorite.
No.
Okay.
Could you tell us? Could you try to condense or try to give some moments about this pontificate, this 8-year pontificate?
So 8 years and 8 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, more or less.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Maybe we have about 10.
We do. All right. Fine. When you're working in the Vatican, when you're working for the Pope, as you're working, in the Vatican with Rome Reports, days kind of blend and merge with one another, because you get up in the morning and there's a papal speech to translate, and the Pope has met with someone, and who was that person, and you're reporting on a papal audience or an event, or you're organizing a radio or TV commentary for some papal liturgy or something. So it's kind of, there was always a lot happening. I have to say this. It wasn't easy, because not everyone understood Benedict XVI. At the very beginning of his pontificate, if you go back and you look at the headlines, the way when we were excited because we knew who he was, but there were some very insulting responses to his election to the papacy. People saw him as the Pope's watchdog, as the Pope's disciplinarian, as Cardinal No, which we knew wasn't true. And so a lot of our work was just trying to redress the narrative, trying to address the negative comments and place things in context, and help him to get his message out. So if you're asking me for favorite moments, and in such a short time, I would probably have to condense them. We saw just a moment ago, Arturo was showing us some images of the Pope's visit to the United States. So why don't we start right there? It's probably the papal. I was very fortunate to be able to travel with him to various places, And one of those was to the United States of America. So there you go. There he is. He's arriving in the United States, and we are in 2008. 2008. Thank you. When you get to my age, your consecutive memory is gone. I know it happens. I don't know when. We're in 2008. This momentous visit to the United States. Do remember, and I have to say this as well, it's in the midst of the sex abuse scandals.
Yes.
And we've had, you know, the Boston Globe and everybody, it's all about the sex abuse. And he addressed it head on. He addressed it in the aircraft arriving in America. So it had already he already cleared the air with the journalists before he touched the ground. George W. Bush, as you saw, that was Andrews Air Base. The president doesn't come to the airport to meet a pope.
No.
He meets him at the White House. So that was already a sign of incredible respect towards Benedict. We then had this meeting at the White House, which was it was the Pope's 81st birthday.
Perfect way to celebrate your birthday.
And I have to say, the president was extraordinarily gracious. He'd prepared this birthday celebration for Benedict. There was a cake. There was a children's choir singing. The whole thing was just delightful. And then, of course, you're seeing right now, I mean, there was so there were papal masses. You see him at the United Nations. He received a standing ovation at the United Nations. He met with the Jewish community. He met with young people. It was an incredibly powerful and dense visit. But ask me what the highlight was for me.
What was the highlight of the U.S. visit?
Well, thank you for asking, Kelsey. The highlight was, and I'm not sure we saw it in the pictures earlier, it was the visit to Ground Zero.
Yes, he did. We saw some pictures.
I was looking at you. I wasn't looking at the visual. Because Ground Zero was really Ground Zero in 2010. It was a hole in the ground. They hadn't started construction. They were still clearing away the debris back then. And there was Pope Benedict. It was early in the morning. It was freezing cold, I remember. It was misty. It was foggy. And there's the Pope kneeling on the ground in Ground Zero. And he's greeting survivors and families of people who were killed in the 9/11 attacks. And all the time, there's a solo cello playing. That we didn't get because we didn't have sound in those pictures. He was the first cello of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, and he was playing Bach, which is one of Benedict's favorites.
He's a lover of music, I know that.
And that's so in the absolute silence, in this crater in the ground where this devastating event has taken place, all you hear is the sound of this cello playing Bach in the background. That was one of the most definitely moving events, and is stuck in my memory. Thanks for asking.
No, thanks for prompting it. Just before we get any further, I just want to say to everyone watching at home, please feel free to send any questions you have that Sean would love to answer. Try to answer as well. So please send any questions, any messages in the group chat, in the Zoom chat. So thank you. But I will say, Pope Benedict, like you were saying before, isn't always necessarily known for his relationships. He was known as the intellectual Pope. But as that interview that you said that he had, the off-the-cuff thing in the Vatican Radio, as that demonstrated, he wasn't just about the head, he was also about the heart and the people that he was talking to. And with that, I think we saw that a little bit in the US visit, but then following up with Pope St. John Paul II and World Youth Day, we also saw Pope Benedict really get involved with the youth.
Can we talk about World Youth Day?
I would love to talk about it.
Can we talk about Sydney, Australia?
Yes.
Do we have any pictures of Sydney, Australia?
We do. I think we can see some more of at least part of World Youth Day in 2008.
This was World Youth Day 2008, yes. I think, these are the pictures. This is the final.
The closing mass.
The closing mass, my gosh. So where to begin? Yes, the excitement of the Pope going all the way to Sydney, Australia. It was I think a 20-hour flight just to get there. And again, we're talking about someone of a certain age. What I do remember is how the Australian organizers went out of their way. They had the piano tuned in the house he was staying in, just in case he wanted to play the piano. And this, I'm not sure anybody out there knows. And that is, they brought in a kitten called Bella to keep him company, because they know that he's a cat lover. He was loved cats as well.
Yes.
But his relationship with the young people. There was they brought him to Sydney Harbour from a place called Barangaroo. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. If any Australians watching, I think, but he arrived in a boat together with 12 young people. He had lunch with young people. He really, again, he went to visit a group of disadvantaged young people. So it was really this sense of engaging with them. We're still watching images of that, the final Youth Day Mass, and look closely at the chasuble that he's wearing, that red chasuble Pope Benedict is wearing, because
it's something special, isn't it?
Do you want to say it?
No, I think everyone wants you to say it.
I think a lot. I hope some people already. That's the chasuble he was buried in. That red chasuble you saw that he used during the World Youth Day Mass in Sydney, Australia. And I know Australians are hugely proud of this fact that Pope Benedict is buried in that red chasuble.
I mean, obviously it was an important visit for him. Like, it wasn't just, I think a lot of times we think of World Youth Day, and of course it's special for the people, the country that the Pope goes to, but of course it's also special for the Pope.
Yes.
And I think it was no different for Pope Benedict. It was a chance to reach out to people, it was a chance to get to speak to people about, of course, yes, his writings, his work, the faith, but also just to connect with people on that personal level.
Okay, you said it. So I think it needs to be clarified, because there is a narrative out there. We've been seeing it and hearing it and reading it the last few days. We keep hearing about, the intellectual Pope, the theologian Pope, and so on and so forth. Like he was out of touch.
Yes.
He was certainly. When I think of his speeches in the United States, in Australia, in any of the trips that I went to, and his marvelous homilies and his speeches here in Rome and now during so many events, he always turned things upside down. It was always the positive message. So, he would go to a place like the United States or wherever, and there would be criticism even before he arrived, because he's going to come and he's going to tell us what to do. And that visit to Sydney, Australia, the World Youth Day, he's going to go and he's going to lecture the young people on morality. Right? He's going to wag his finger in their faces, and it's exactly the opposite. Go back and read what he says. He constantly invites young people. At the youth, he's calling them to be prophets. He's calling them to be saints. He's encouraging them. He's telling them how beautiful it is to have a personal relationship with God. That's the core of the message all the time. Huh? Never negative, always switching over to the positive, to encouraging, and so forth. I think that needs to be said. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a big point too, is how, because that is sometimes the narrative, that's sometimes how we look back and see Pope Benedict. But I think it's also because for a lot of people, immediately and naturally, you compare him to JP2.
He was a tough act to follow.
Anyone would have had trouble. But Benedict, I think, really did live up to the task. He did so much, and he connected with people, not just young people, not just Catholics, but he also reached out to the Jewish community. That was a huge thing. That one of his first messages when he became Pope was to the Jewish synagogue, the Jewish community here in Rome. And it wasn't just here in Rome. He also connected with the Jewish communities pretty much wherever he went.
And Islamic community, the Muslim community. And I think that was a visit to the Holy Land. Right?
Yes.
And I was on that too. We went to Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. We have pictures for.
I think we do. Can we look back at the Holy Land
look
trip?
at I don't know what we've got there, but certainly
some of the highlights.
Certainly, yeah. Jordan. He was met by the King and Queen of Jordan. We went there from there to Israel, to Jerusalem, and we saw him at the Wailing Wall. He met with Shimon Peres, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, at the presidential palace. There were so many symbols during that visit, I remember. Shimon Peres gifted him with a nanotechnological version of the Bible and a microchip. And I remember Benedict was hugely enthusiastic about this, because his whole thing about faith and reason, science and faith. He loved scientific. He was fascinated by all things scientific. Then if I think, going to Temple, he went to Temple Mount. Here he is with Shimon Peres as well. Temple Mount. Can I tell a funny story too, or does it all have to be very serious?
No, very funny.
Can it be funny? Okay, so we're there at Temple Mount. It's the mosque, and it's very, very serious, massive security, I remember. and I'm part of the papal entourage and with the cardinals and the VIPs and so on and so forth. And of course, we're going into a mosque, and so you have to take your shoes off. So we all take our shoes off. Benedict takes his shoes off, but his secretary has a little white bag, and he's carrying the Pope's shoes in his little bag with him. Our shoes are outside the door. Problem, they take us in one door, we go through the mosque, and they take us out through the other door. And we're on a schedule here because we have, we're running late because papal visits are always going late, you see. And here we are, we're scrambling around, and they've moved the shoes. And I remember scenes of chaos with cardinals running around trying to, you've got my shoes. No, those are my shoes. And we were all late for the next appointment. The Pope had already started before we got there because he had his shoes, but we didn't have ours. Anyway, silly stuff. Serious stuff. My favorite moment of the visit was Benedict's visit to Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the memorial to those who were murdered in the Shoah. And that was extraordinary. So here's this German Pope meeting with survivors of the Holocaust, and inside this extraordinary memorial. Yad Vashem in Hebrew means the memorial to the names. So it's not about statistics, it's not about numbers. There are photographs. They collect the stories of these people, and so listening to their stories, that was extraordinarily moving, I remember.
Yeah, and something that you definitely, I mean, for me, that at least reminds me of, for Americans, ground zero, like you were saying before, it's not just about what happened, but the people. And it's something beautiful. It's something beautiful that the Pope was able to do. And I think, again, like his love for that interfaith dialogue. And it wasn't just, okay, I'm the Pope, I need to reach out to people who are of a different faith. It wasn't a calculated thing. It wasn't I have to do this. It was, he wanted to reach out to people. He
celebrated Mass in Manger Square in Bethlehem, inside the Palestinian territories. I mean, the image of him, the fact of him being there, he brought so much hope, he brought so much encouragement, just by his presence. It's always difficult to calculate.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, again, the focus for Benedict, well, maybe you can explain a little bit more, you knew him a little bit better, but it wasn't just something that started when he was a Pope, this love of people, this love of connecting. I mean, as a cardinal, as you said, he would connect with you on the streets. He would speak with you. He had a favorite restaurant here in Rome where he would go and drink beer. There's a little plaque that says Joseph Ratzinger used to sit here and drink beer. And so it wasn't just something that started when he was a Pope.
Not at all, not at all. But again, you also mentioned, you said John Paul II, I mean, 26 years of a pontificate. People grew up with John Paul II. They'd never known any other Pope. There was no other way to do things.
Exactly.
But of course, each person brings their own charisma, their own style of doing things. John Paul II was a hugger.
Yes.
It was embarrassing because when he was younger and stronger, he used to, if you tried to kiss his ring, he would actually drag you to your feet, and slap you on the back. And so, yeah, he was a hugger. Benedict was not a hugger. But may I do this? I mean, he would do, if you put out your hand to greet, we're going to shake hands with him, he'd do this. He'd do the two-hand handshake, always. Check it out. Don't believe me. Look at the pictures. He would always do the two-hand, which is it's a virtual hug. Huh? And he'd actually hold your hands together like this. And there was something very warm and very intimate about that.
Well, and I think that's a good way to really...
Are we still watching pictures of the Holy Land?
No, right now I think we're looking at another important moment, which also highlighted an important step, as you mentioned before, when we were talking about when he was first elected. He was dealing with a lot of the sex abuse scandals. And a huge visit for that was in the UK, when he met with victims or survivors of sexual abuse. And maybe we can watch a little bit of the scenes from his visit to the UK.
All right. Yeah, thank you. That gives me an opportunity to talk about that because yes, I was there too. And I remember also the massive negative publicity that preceded the visit. There were people, there were organized groups that did not want him to come, that were threatening to have protests and demonstrations and not let his aircraft land, horrible things. I remember an editorial, I won't mention the name of the newspaper, but there was an editorial that said, and I quote, something to the effect of, the German Shepherd is arriving, a nasty reference, of course, to the German Shepherd is arriving. At the worst, he will be insulted and humiliated. At best, he will be ignored. And this is before he'd even stepped off the plane. And of course, exactly the opposite happened.
Yes.
Because it's always, what are these negative expectations? But then you meet the person. This is what they said before he arrived. When they left, I remember one of the headlines in a British newspaper was, "Goodbye, Grandpa." So a total conversion.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is his visit to Westminster, the Westminster Hall. It's the Houses of Parliament. This again, we're trying to condense this so much. My mind is going crazy, right?
There's so much to say.
I'm like watching a movie in fast forwarding a movie here. I want to say how he arrived in Scotland and met with the Queen in Edinburgh, and how marvelously they hit it off, the two of them, because they were almost the same age. And I remember off camera him complimenting her on her garden. Oh. This was the small talk, and of course she's very proud of her garden. It's the kind of thing two older people will talk about, you see.
Well, and they're both animal lovers.
And they're both, yes, they certainly. And him in the motorcade, wearing a tartan scarf, which had been specially made for him, and eating Aberdeen Angus steak in the evening. All these little bits and pieces. But then more profoundly and more importantly, because I don't want to just talk about silly things, the theme of that visit was heart speaks to heart. You see how everything connects? Yes. And that's a quote from Cardinal Newman, who was very much present virtually present during that visit.
He was the patron, right, of the visit.
Very good. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And that's exactly what Benedict did. He spoke heart to heart. And I'm just thinking of, so that's what you just saw, the visit to Westminster. He stood on the spot in Westminster Hall where Sir Thomas More was condemned to death in 1535. If there are any historians out there, correct me, please. I think it was 1535. On the very spot where Thomas More was condemned to death, the symbolism of it. And on that spot, he speaks about religion and politics and the role religion plays in the political sphere. And he speaks about religious freedom. And it's one of the most extraordinary speeches that I think he ever gave, one of the very best. It was the first time a pope had done that in Westminster Hall. On the same day, he visited Lambeth Palace, where the Archbishop of Canterbury resides. The first time a pope had ever done that. And then outside Westminster Abbey, I remember there were groups of young people relating to him, to this old man, because he's speaking to them, and he's not criticizing them, he's encouraging. He's telling them how much hope and trust he has in them. He's emboldening them. And that's what young people want to be. Yes. And so I remember these groups of young people standing outside Westminster Abbey. Britain, the English are they're all, well, like Italians, football crazy.
Of course.
You say soccer.
We say soccer.
Soccer, football,
soccer fans.
Soccer fans. So they made these soccer jerseys with fake football results on them. And it said, yes. And the front of the jersey, I wish I should have bought one. I mean, you never think of things at the time. On the front, it said England 4. And on the back, it said Benedict 16.
Oh, wow.
You get it?
Yes.
England for Benedict 16. You get yeah. That's so sweet.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
But that's amazing. And I mean, again, there's just these little moments that, again, make you think of him as a grandfather, as someone who does care for people. And honestly, as you were saying, he's a pope, or he was a pope of a lot of firsts. He did a lot of firsts.
He did. People have thought that John Paul II had done it all, but no. He really was.
We learned a lot from him about being the first, about doing things a different way. And I think one moment that a lot of people will remember, but I should say it's not the moment that we should remember him for, but it's a moment that people definitely think of, was the moment that he resigned. He stepped down.
Are we at the resignation already? Are we nearly done?
We're getting to that
almost
point.
Timed out already?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh, sorry. I was talking too much. I apologize.
No, but so I think we should just take a look back at that moment when Pope Benedict resigned.
Right.
Now, for me, this was something, I mean, for most people, this was the
Yes.
first Pope in 600 years, almost 600 years that someone had resigned. And I mean, this was very different than the last time someone had resigned. And I think it's important to note why he did it. It wasn't just, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yes, right. Where shall we start? I think
Well, let's start with where you were.
Oh, okay.
when this happened.
It's always a good way. Where were where were you in 62? No, you weren't. Yeah, I was. Anyway,
13.
so we're on the 11th of February. The 11th of February at 11:30 in the morning, we had our editorial meeting at the English section of the Vatican Radio, of which so I was chairing an editorial meeting. In my office, I had a big flat screen TV right in front of my desk, which had a video feed to major events or other events. So I sort of had we had a feed of the Vatican kind of sound was down, but I have this TV in front of me. And the Pope is, he's presiding over a consistory for the martyrs of Otranto. Now, I challenge anybody to tell me where Otranto is, who the martyrs of Otranto were, and why he was holding a consistory. And it was, I'm sorry, it was boring. It was not our major event of the day. And it's 11:30 in the morning. We're having editorial meetings. So what's he doing? Oh, he's doing this thing, the consistory, but the TV is on. I have it in front of me, and so I can't not notice. Every now and again, I'm looking up because we kind of, we're distracted by TVs, and I see the expressions on the faces. Arturo, can we see that again? Possiamo rivedere? Just to see look at the expressions on the faces of the cardinals. And even if you can't hear what he's saying, you kind of caught by, he must be saying something strange.
Because they look surprised, confused.
Surprised, confused, what's going on here? And it's at that moment, it's about 11:35 that my colleague from the English section comes in and asks me, Sean, did you do Latin at school? And I go, yeah. And meanwhile, Pope's talking away, and he says, do you know what ingravescente aetate means? Ingravescente aetate. I go, well, aetate, it's Italian, means age. But what does ingravescente mean? It's in incumbent old age. And he goes, because that's what the Pope just said. I think he's just resigned. And it was around 11:43 that I have to give credit to ANSA, Italian news agency. It was a colleague of ours she called Father Lombardi, who was the press officer. He knew his Latin, and he'd been following every word the Pope was saying and confirmed, yes, he's just said that he's stepping down. And she put out the first report in Italian on ANSA. And even then people were, oops, do we say this? Is this real? And that everything just went crazy, went through the floor. Because I think he was the first Pope to resign. I mean, I know people talk about, Celestine V and all that stuff. Did Celestine? I don't think Celestine stepped down. I think he was pushed.
He was pushed. Yes. He definitely didn't want to be Pope in the first place, but then he didn't want to leave either. But the cardinals kind of, it was a different time, a very different time.
And then, of course, so can I read in your mind?
Please tell me
it's what everybody always asks. Did you ask? Did I?
Did you expect it?
Did I expect? I know did you expect it?
Well, especially since you knew him, did you expect it?
And I'm reading stuff over the last few days, and people are talking about the resignation because he was the Pope who resigned, and I'm reading people are saying, oh well, of course we knew he was going to.
Did they
really?
Because I didn't.
Oh, well, he visited L'Aquila in 2009, and he placed his papal stole on the tomb of Celestine. And everybody thought, well, why is he doing that? There's the Pope who resigned. And there were a few sort of little red flags, but we thought in the end, no, that's a cute thing to do. And why not? And Benedict sincerely never gave the sense of being someone who was going to step down. He had been to Lebanon on a papal trip to Lebanon, I think, in September, late September of the previous year. So not even 6 months before. He'd been to Mexico and Cuba the previous year.
Right.
That's not a pope who's stepping down.
Not one that's definitely thinking about it.
Or even,
right.
So I'm sorry, I don't buy into that. But no, we were completely, am I allowed to say gobsmacked?
Yes.
On the air?
Yeah.
You know, okay.
I think that's okay.
Is that okay?
2023.
Okay. We were gobsmacked. We did not expect it. We fell through the floor and everything literally went crazy because most people did not. And it was all about what happens now. And then the whole, is it legal?
Yeah.
Can he do this?
Will the next pope be a pope? Do we still have a pope? How does that work? A lot of questions.
But that's why he did it in Latin. And that's why he did it in front of all the cardinals. And that's why we have the recording.
Right.
And that's why he says things to the effect of with full knowledge and consent and in free will I choose. The wording, Benedict,
yes.
He sat down and he thought through every single word. He resigned. There was only ever one pope, despite what the movie pretends to say. Anyway.
Well, with that, I would love to ask you more questions, but I think it's only fair that we get to some of the questions from the people at home. So let's see. We have one from Tom. It says,
hi, Tom.
How did Seàn-Patrick get to work in the Vatican under Pope Paul VI?
Oh my goodness.
Starting with a tough one.
All right. No, it's not a tough one, Tom. Thank you. I appreciate the questions. You're a young person, are you, Tom? And you're looking for a job. That's what it sounds like.
Send in your resume.
It's a kind of sort of. It's a long story. I was very young. I was very inexperienced. But I'd always been involved with radio. Since I was a kid, I was involved in radio in some way or other. And I was studying here in Rome, and I was young and I was hungry and very ambitious. And the only other way I could earn some extra money was to work on radio. And Vatican Radio was there and had an English broadcasting section. And so I applied, and I think it was my lean and hungry look and I wanted so badly to do this, but it was a different time, Tom. It was the 1970s. We were all so innocent. It probably couldn't happen today. So I consider myself incredibly lucky, incredibly blessed, and I'm sure you'll find your way too. Well,
Tom responded saying he's not really young.
Oh.
But maybe he was around during the 70s as well.
Oh, maybe that's why you're
getting a second start, you know.
Okay. It was very different too. I mean, Paul VI was still being carried around on a sedia gestatoria, Tom. He was wearing gloves. He was referring to himself in the plural. You know, the first person plural. We ourselves. And to translate, it was so different. But then we were different. We were different too.
We have another question from Barbara. She asks, how would Seàn-Patrick sum up Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI's most important contributions to the world? So that's even more difficult, maybe.
Okay, Barbara, so how long do we have here? Do you want to invite me for tea, and maybe we can talk about this over a nice cup of tea?
Biscuits. I think it's going to be a full chat.
It's a big one. So people used to say, there's the saying going around Rome that went around for a long time, it's still out there, you may even heard it these past few days, people would go to see John Paul II and they would go to listen to Benedict XVI. And I don't want to be a party sort of, but I'm not sure about that either. You know, Benedict XVI was beautiful. He wore this white hair, these white robes, and everything he did was beautiful. He believed in reflecting the beauty of celebrating the beauty of the divine. His liturgies were always exquisite. Everything about it. Yes, you went to see Benedict as well. What was the contribution? He always managed to balance the exterior beauty, the form, with the substance. So you went to hear Benedict, but you went to see him as well. And the two kind of merged into a single powerful message. I think that was his ability. It was all about harmony, about balance. That whole faith and reason, science and reason, all about balance, the two balancing each other out, you know, and harmonizing. That was his message, a message of harmony, balance, unity, those constantly.
And his work as a professor, I'm sure, really helped with the presentation.
Oh yes, so much so.
It's not easy.
He was wonderful to watch and he was wonderful to listen to. Yeah. Thank you, Barbara.
We have another question from Annalise. She says, for Sean, what surprised you the most about working closely with Pope Benedict?
Oh, Annalise, it's always these, your favorite, the most, the least, those are always embarrassing questions because my mind goes into a complete freeze.
Because you have so many to
say. Yes. Just the most surprised. Oh my goodness. I tried to give some examples with the papal trips. I think what surprised me, thank you. No, thank you. Yes, right. What surprised me, I may have said this before, but excuse me, I'm getting old, the gray hair and all that. So I may repeat myself. But the surprising thing to me about Benedict XVI was the way he was able to overturn the preconceptions. The people who thought he was too old, too German, too conservative, too out of touch, too everything else. And the moment they got a chance to actually engage with him, even at a distance, just listening to him or watching him or being anywhere near him, that whole narrative would simply collapse, and they would find themselves in the presence of a most sensitive, kind, compassionate
grandfather. He
really, yes, to so many. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, Annalise.
We have another question. I think I'm going to say this one, H. Hickson, yes, or Schickson, I'm not sure. Can you give us one word or phrase to summarize the man, the Pope, and his vocation?
Okay, those are three questions in one, huh? The man, the Pope, and his vocation. The man, the Pope, and his vocation. Again, that's at the expense of, yes, not wanting to repeat myself, because a lot of what I've just said answers that, I hope. I myself was surprised when I read his spiritual testament. Yeah, I was surprised because of its brevity. For a man who lived for 95 years to have a spiritual testament condensed into one page. Mm-hmm. And I was moved by the three words, the three concepts, the three ideas that he uses and he expresses in that spiritual testament. And to me, they say a lot about the man, the Pope, and his vocation. Just in case, Hickson, you haven't read that spiritual testament, those three ideas are gratitude in this order: gratitude, forgiveness, and faith. And do you know, Hickson, I was thinking about that this morning, coming to work, and I was wondering about that in my own life. Gratitude, being thankful for everything we are, everything we have. Gratitude, he lays it out in the testament. He thanks his parents, his family, he thanks his teachers, he thanks his students. But gratitude for our health, gratitude for just grateful to be able to be here and to be able to share this with you. Grateful for the 8 years I was able to be with him, for everything, the gratitude, forgiveness, to always be aware that we're not perfect. And there's always going to be someone we've hurt, someone we've offended, either on purpose or not. And so not seeking forgiveness from God, from our fellow human beings, for not being as good as we should be. And faith which sustains us, the belief that sustains us, that gives us the strength, the energy to be who we are and to do what we do. Those, I think those are the three words that would define him as a man and as a Pope and as a priest. Thank you for that question, for allowing me to think through it again.
Now we have a couple more questions, but we're running out of time. So I'm just going to choose
That's good, because I'm running out of
the choose. We'll go, since Tom, you already asked a question, I'm sorry. We'll go with iPhone de Jose, who asks, with which Pope does Sean feel he has a closer connection with, and why? Out of the many popes that you've served with.
And that's such an unfair question. Also, it's kind of like asking if you're a dad or a mom, saying, so which is your favorite child? And any, if you
some had favorites.
it's not true. So if you ask any, I'm a biological father, so I'm allowed to say, if you ask any parent, I think, who's your favorite child, they will always say, I love them all the same, but differently.
Yes.
Because they are different. Oh, you're nodding.
Yeah, because my parents tell me that too.
There
Me
you
and
go.
my sister.
I love them the same, but differently. And of my 5 popes, I love them all the same, but differently, because not only they were different, but I was different. I was a baby. I was so young. I was so stupid when back in the 1970s. I had hair down to my shoulders. You don't want to see pictures of what I looked like back in the.
I think the people are asking.
No, you don't want to see pictures of me back in the 70s. Working for at that time in my life, because of who I was and because of who he was, I think Paul VI. He taught me dignity. This is the Pope you would look up to. John Paul I, whom I really loved, even for 33 days, he was the Pope who taught me humility. He was the Pope who stepped down off the throne and challenged me to meet people where they're at. John Paul II taught me geography because of all the travels around the world. But he also taught me the power of gesture. The power of going out to where people, the need to go where people, to meet people where they are. Benedict taught me how to listen, how to go deep, how to not be satisfied with the surface, but to ask yourself questions, to challenge, to always go deeper. Francis continues to teach me the power of touch, and I know that's an awkward thing today, because especially after the COVID pandemic and so many issues, we don't. I'm delighted to know we can shake hands again. I could never get used to the fist punching or the elbow bumping, but also this idea of going out to the peripheries, to the places that no one pays attention to the people no one pays attention to the disabled, to the aged, to the intellectually challenged, to all those people that are not in the forefront of our minds or of the news feeds. Those are the reasons why I love them all the same, all differently.
Well, thank you guys for your questions. Sean, thank you so much for being here. That's all the time we have for right now.
Yes, just getting warmed up here.
No, I know. Maybe you're practicing a bit today. I think this isn't all the time we have. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Great, wonderful questions. Thank you. Wonderful to talk to you. Thank you also to our line producer, and thank you for joining us. Truly, bless you.
Yes, we want to thank our entire Rome Reports team, especially Arturo and our production team, for everything they did. And of course, we want to thank you guys for watching. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for tuning in. And honestly, from all of us here at Rome Reports, thank you again. If you have any other topics you'd like us to discuss, please feel free to send us an email, and you can find that email on our website at romereports.com. Thank you again, and remember to tune into Rome Reports for exclusive content.
Yes, premium
For exclusive content on the Pope and the Vatican. I'm Kelsey Gussie.
I'm Seàn-Patrick Lovett. Goodbye and God bless.
See you next time.